Just a couple of reminders before we carry on. Firstly, if we can just remind all those taking part to speak, and myself included, to speak close enough to the microphone so that those at the back of the room can hear us. And secondly, what may be a regular reminder, just that we have a limited amount of time, and we can ideally focus as much as we can on the scientific evidence relevant to Professor Angus's evidence to the inquiry. Thank you.
Professor Angus, in your inquiry report from paragraph 6, and also in your precognition, paragraph 2 to 5, you argue that this particular area, do you not have those? You argue that this particular area is pristine in different places, and one of a fine example.
I didn't use the word pristine.
Okay, well, can we begin with the quote that you give in paragraph 4, and you rely upon it in both that and in your inquiry report, where you refer to a countryside commission study and bring out the statement that Coul Links is one of the most complex dune systems in the north of Scotland. I think that's NA-HLD-086 if you have that in front of you. Section 6.7. And that quote we find in the very first paragraph of that section. And there's then a description of it. And the next sentence says, the beach unit is large and contains a rich variety of dune landforms and habitats on which has developed an interesting vegetation succession. It's in the same paragraph, the last sentence. And do we see in the next paragraph, it's recorded that at that time, in 1973, when this report was done, that Coul Links was little used for recreation. And further down in that paragraph, few tourists other than anglers and bird watchers. If you turn to page 65, the most interesting, this is reading from the second paragraph, the most interesting feature of Coul Links is the richly varied and highly developed system of dunes in the south part of the beach complex. The dune system is relatively simple and has a form of a single ridge at a point approximately 500 metres northeast of Coul Farm. This single ridge fans out into a series of ridges in which the younger outer members have a smaller radius of curvature than the older inner ones. So this is relative to the dune system. These comments are being made. And further on in the document at page 66, the penultimate paragraph page, it's recorded there that there's more trampling damage in the area immediately north of Embo. And that's still the case today, that it's the area near Embo where there's clear evidence of trampling damage, isn't it?
I haven't examined this area. It's outside the SSI. I've been on a bit of it, but haven't explored all of it.
So there's something, your voice wasn't caught up by the microphone. I didn't hear much of that.
Sorry, I haven't examined the whole of the area between Embo and the southern boundary of the SSI, so I can't comment on how valid this statement would be today. I've only seen part of that section.
So how much of the area have you seen? Is it primarily within the footprint of the golf course that you covered?
Correct, yes.
And then towards the end of that paragraph, the links have a strong ecological interest in the form of a long vegetation succession from embryo dunes through dune pasture to heath and scrub. So in 1973, that's the ecological feature that's identified. And page 67, the last paragraph, again there's mention of the finding that the site at that time was little used for recreation. And then the final page in this section, 68. Do you see the third paragraph from the bottom that begins current agricultural use? Is causing little environmental damage, but if pasture improvement was to proceed on a large scale, there could be a danger that successional patterns of vegetation might be concealed, and hence the scientific interest of the links seriously impaired. Does that not indicate that the author writing at that time was of the view that if the successional patterns in vegetation were lost, then that would affect the scientific interest of the site?
That would appear to be the case, though I stress that the authors were actually geomorphologists rather than ecologists. That does not invalidate their view.
No, because they clearly differentiate in this paper between geomorphology and ecological interest, don't they?
They do, but my point is that they may not be qualified to make ecological judgments, though I have no quibble with this.
And then we see in the next paragraph, despite the strong physiographic and ecological interest of the links, very little detailed investigation has yet been made. It is suggested that a detailed scientific investigation of the area is desirable. Now, can we take it that despite the fact you've produced, well, SNH has produced many, many scientific references to this inquiry from all over the world in relation to different species and habitats, this is the only study that we have specific to Coul links?
No, I think you'll also find there is a paper by Ogilvy, I forget the SNH number, but it deals in some detail with the geomorphology of Coul links along with other sites in the Moray Firth. Furthermore, we have cited in productions but not actually used Dr. Dargey's site report in the Sound Dune Vegetation Survey of Scotland that deals with this site.
The report dealing with Scotland as a whole, it does cover Coul links, but we don't have something that's a detailed investigation in respect to Coul links.
Not to my recollection, no. So
to your knowledge, despite this recommendation in 1973, 45 years ago, nothing's been done?
No, I wouldn't concede that nothing's been done. I've just described Dr. Dargey's work on the Sound Dune Vegetation Survey of Scotland. Furthermore, the report that is before us at the moment was published in 1973. It was addressed to the Countryside Commission for Scotland, which was not at that time the Nature Conservation Authority. And there was research done before the site was made a site of special scientific interest. For some reason, the specific evidence base for what was called the Nature Conservation is confined to the published volume, the Nature Conservation Review, which we have not cited as a production.
Do you have? You haven't produced. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, I missed the question.
You said this other publication that you were referring to provides evidence, is, as you describe it, evidence-based, but it's not produced before the inquiry.
It's not, because it isn't really site-specific evidence. It is the rationale behind the selection of what were called Nature Conservation Review sites published in 1977, and it gives only a brief description of the whole of Loch Fleet.
And the document that you refer to, NA-HLD-086, the Ogilvy article, which you say also gives some information, just having looked it up, it's a physiographic investigation on the coastal belt of the Moray Firth, Gulf of Port Gordon, and it was carried out in 1923. So the point I put to you some time ago was that 45 years ago there was a recommendation from this paper that you rely upon that a detailed scientific investigation of the area be carried out. And in relation to the ecological interest of the links, but we don't have any such detailed scientific investigation.
SNH 30.
Sorry?
SNH 30, 30.
Is that the Dr. Dargy vegetation survey that you're referring to?
No, it describes the vegetation of the golf course layout using a comparison of the vegetation provided by the applicant and the survey we already had from Dr. Dargy's work in the Sound and Vegetation Survey of Scotland.
Is that your hole-by-hole analysis that you're referring to?
Correct.
Coul Links is concerned, that is the only piece of work that we have in relation to the site.
We have done a great deal of work around this case, not all of which is so distinctly identified as that report, but I cannot believe you are in any doubt that SNH has put a great deal of effort into its analysis of this case.
That's not the point that I'm pursuing with you. The point I'm pursuing with you is that you rely upon this paper as being evidence of the importance of Coul Links. It's 45 years old, for a start, and the site has changed in that period of time.
It might have, and that is, I believe, can you remind me of when I quoted this? Because I think I did take that into account and quoted something else.
You quote it in paragraph 4 of your precognition and paragraph 6, I think, of your inquiry report.
It's paragraph 7, where the point has been made that it's been described as one of the most complex dune systems in the north of Scotland, and there's a reference to SNH 75, page 63.
In that case, I have no alternative but concede your point. There is very little published information. But I reiterate my point that SNH did a great deal of analysis on this case and the evidence before it.
What I'm exploring with you is whether what we find in your evidence to this inquiry is a fair description of Coul Links. And you made a comment just a moment ago that suggested that you thought there might be a similarity still between the site now compared to 1973, but the evidence before the inquiry is that there's been very significant invasive species developing on the site since 1973.
Yes, and we have site condition monitoring information to that effect. We are not disputing that there has been scrub invasion since that point, nor are we disputing that there has been spread of heath within that period. But it is interesting to note that the evidence offered by Professor Pye emphasizes the long-term stability of this system in geomorphological terms, which is what the quote I took from the beginning of the Coul section of this report referred to.
Well, I'm exploring with you at the moment the other evidence in this report that you haven't cited, and you've emphasized to me this morning that you're interested more in ecology than geomorphology. So I'm exploring that topic with you as the witness dealing with ecology at the site. And there are parts in this report that deal specifically with the scientific interest of the links from an ecological point of view. But what we don't find in your inquiry report or your precognition is a recognition as to the extent to which the site has degraded since 1973.
I may not have cited 1973 as my starting point, but I certainly accept in my topic paper that the site has had localized degradation.
You also accept, relative to the point being made in this paper, that that degradation has affected the sequence of habitats as a consequence of the development of the invasive species.
I don't recall saying that.
No, you don't say it. I'm putting it to you. That is the consequence of the invasive species. That is the impact on the scientific interest.
It has had an impact. It has not significantly detracted from the holistic approach we have to this site, in that you have 4 subtypes of sand dune that are linked in biological and physical process terms, and succession is only part of that.
The most mention that I can find in your evidence is of the current condition is your assertion that SNH is doing everything possible and trying to persuade the landowner to enter into a management agreement. That's really the extent of your evidence as to what is being done to seek to reverse the unfavourable status.
If SNH has made every effort to resolve this, what more do you wish us to do?
Well, answer the question, please, Professor Angus. That's the extent of your evidence in terms of SNH's efforts to resolve the unfavourable condition of the site in relation to sand dune habitat.
I don't see this as a problem. I think SNH has gone through the proper channels and has attempted to rectify this situation in consultation with the owner.
But it doesn't appear from your evidence that SNH has sought to remedy this loss of succession.
Well, I'm not sure what you expect me to say here. We have accepted there is a problem, and we have gone through the channels we go through in these circumstances, and we have contacted the landowner seeking some form of agreement with him that will begin to address this issue.
And you haven't been able to achieve that over many years?
We haven't. The landowner seems reluctant to proceed with this.
Well, there are very substantial problems on the site that have to be addressed, aren't there?
That is exactly what we're trying to achieve.
And therefore it would not be surprising that the landowner finds that onerous and burdensome.
The agreements involved, I understand, come with financial assistance.
But the landowner has to reach a judgment as to whether or not that financial assistance is acceptable and will cover the costs.
just
I have
before
no
that
knowledge of
question-
this.
Sorry, just can I intervene there just before that question's answered? As I understand that the principal landowner is aligned with the development, is not giving evidence to the inquiry such that their evidence on this issue might be tested. And this is Ms Wilson putting her understanding of what the landowner's position might be to a witness who obviously comes in from a different perspective. I do question whether it's relevant to what we're discussing this afternoon.
If I could respond to that. I would have expected SNH as an organisation to understand the type of circumstances that result in landowners being unwilling to enter into management agreements.
It seems to me a relevant point insofar as part of SNH's evidence is about these alternative means of addressing issues with the condition of the site. However, again, I understand SNH's position. I understand that for whatever reason, that other means of remedying any issues isn't progressing or hasn't progressed. So I think it's relevant, but I'm not taking much from it. So I just wonder, is there much more on this line, Ms Wilson?
Yes, finishing the line. So. The fact of the matter is, though, in your assessment, because of the line you take on this matter, you don't appear to acknowledge the true baseline of the condition of the site today, but instead rely upon very outdated papers.
The 1973 report was substantially a geomorphological report to a predecessor body with a different function from SNH and with a different function from the then statutory Nature Conservation Authority, the Nature Conservancy Council. We acknowledge there is a problem now. We acknowledge that this has developed over time. I don't have any problem with this.
Well, I would suggest that in giving your evidence and forming your view, you should have a problem with this situation because you are developed primarily on the basis of permanent loss of sand dune habitat. Equally, continuing degradation of the site through further invasion of the species will equally just as much sand dune habitat as your.
I disagree. The scales involved are completely different. Furthermore, the next step in this process, if the landowner really won't engage in any management agreement, the next step would be a land management order which involves an element of compulsion. And though these powers are available to us, we are disinclined to use them because we don't like pushing people around. And if we intended to use them, which we would only do after a great deal of discussion internally, it is my understanding that these procedures have to be referred to the Scottish Government before they can be implemented.
Well, that's something of an irrelevance, isn't it? Because as a matter of fact, SNH have no plans to make such an order.
Yet.
They have no plans. They cannot come before this inquiry and say there are plans to make such an order. I'm putting it to you that as a matter of fact, there are no plans in place. You just said yet, that's in the future. As of today's date sitting here, you can't bring to this inquiry anything concrete to indicate how the management of the site might vary.
No, absolutely agree, but then this is not my sphere of operation. This would be dealt with by local staff. And I am confident that they have the matter in hand. We just have been distracted somewhat by the current planning application.
Well, again, let's be accurate. When you say you're confident, do you know as a matter of fact that local staff are putting in place steps to promote a land management order?
I'm fairly confident without having direct knowledge that they have not yet got to that stage, because I would almost certainly have been advised of it in the context of this evidence. I have complete confidence that my area colleagues have the matter in hand and have taken it as far as it is possible to take it in the current circumstances, because we would not contemplate a land management order of this nature when it has such a significant role in a public inquiry.
You suggested that the amount of the sand dunes lost to the invasive species and the degradation of the site is of a different scale to that resulting from the development. Could you look please at CD 1.34? So you'll understand that it's a comparison that Alba Ecology carried out between three different dates, 1988 and 2009 to 2016, an aerial comparison of the habitats of Coul lynx. So we were aware of this document when you gave evidence to the effect that the scale of the development would have a greater effect than the damage caused by invasive species.
I did not specifically have this document in mind. I used an overall impression of the development.
Well, how is that overall impression formed?
From reading the many, many documents before this inquiry, and prior to that, the planning application.
Are you referring to the environmental statement when you say you looked at many of the documents?
Among others.
I think we established after lunch that there's not much amongst the many SNH references that's specific to Coul lynx. So it couldn't have been the SNH references you were looking at.
No, I was looking at the applicant's evidence in the main and combining that with our own site condition monitoring results. And of course, having visited the site on several occasions.
Well, let's just see what the results were of this. The methodology is set out at the front and the limitations are identified at the front. It's explained which of the invasive species could be assessed using aerial photography. And on page 3, do we see that in 1988, the area of dense dune heath was 21.3 hectares, which increased to 24.9 hectares, thus confirming what Alba Ecology has said, and you've agreed that there is an increase in dune heath. Yes? The area of bracken between 1988 and 2016 has doubled. It's gone from 1.83 hectares to 3.66 hectares. And the area of dense birch woodland has gone from 1.54 hectares to 5.18 hectares, a 233% increase over 28 years. Those are substantial increases in hectarage affected by invasive species, are they?
I don't dispute this. SNH does not dispute that there is a problem on this site. We regard this problem as reversible, providing we can get the cooperation of the local landowner.
You suggested in one of your answers to me a short time ago that the scale of dune heath or SSSI important habitat that would be lost through invasive species was of a different scale to that from that would be lost from the development. And I would suggest to you that that isn't the case.
Depends what you mean by lost. I've just indicated that I believe this situation is retrievable.
Heath.
Sorry, apologies for interrupting. It's not an evidential issue. I'm just really struggling to hear because the microphone keeps cutting out, and being down at this end of the hall, it's difficult to hear sometimes.
This was the one. This was the third time lucky. How long has the sand dune habitat been in unfavourable conservation status?
I would have to investigate that before answering.
So you don't know?
I don't know. But the site condition monitoring has only been conducted since 2000.
So we know from the site management statement that's before the inquiry that as at 2014 it was recorded as unfavourable, no change, don't we?
I don't dispute this.
So therefore the use of the phrase no change suggests that before 2014 and the monitoring was carried out, it was unfavourable then.
Very probably, yes.
So would that have been recorded in 2000 at the date of the first survey?
I'm afraid I don't know. I would have to look that up.
Well, perhaps you could check that and confirm to the inquiry for us. I'll finish with that document if you want to proceed with it. So, at what point in your expertise will the invasion of such species take the site to a point where you would consider declassifying it? How much of the habitat would you have to lose if the integrity of the SSSI is compromised as a consequence of the losses associated with the golf club?
I know of no site in Scotland where invasion, whether it be of scrub or other invasive species, has reached that point. So we have not yet made such a decision. There obviously is such a point. We are not yet approaching that at Coul Links, in my opinion.
Well, how much of the site, I think was the question I put to you before you did?
I think there is more to this than a numerical threshold.
Well, it doesn't appear there's more to it as a numerical threshold so far as the integrity assessment for Coul Links golf course proposal is concerned.
I would suggest that the situation has moved on considerably since the site integrity assessment was written, and in accordance with the views of the reporters that the inquiry should cover additional information, we have presented that additional information, and were we to address a site integrity assessment again, it is likely that these issues would be added to the analysis. It was a document of its time.
Well, I'll come to the site integrity assessment shortly, but that answer confirms what I was going to put to you, which is that the site integrity assessment is not in any way based upon the indirect impacts that you now speak to in your evidence.
As I say, I am responding to the request from the reporters to address issues such as fragmentation and site function.
It could also be that SNH, having realised that its subjection is the cause of this public inquiry, that serious consideration was given internally to whether or not there are additional arguments that could be put forward in support of its position.
So I don't understand what you're trying to refer to here.
Obviously, it would have been known internally that you would have to appear before the inquiry to justify SNH's objection.
Sorry.
It would have been known and discussed with SNH, within SNH, that it was going to have to appear before this inquiry and justify its objection. And there would have been discussion about whether or not there were other additional matters that could be brought forward to fortify SNH's position.
It's not really part of the nature of my function to respond to such matters. I'm a scientific advisor rather than a policy one.
Could you look at the emails, please, that are APP 1.32? Could you look at the email, please, of 21st December 2016, which is the second page into the document?
So I have no email on page 2 that begins on page 2.
It should be an email from John
21st
Utley.
21st of December.
Yes, thank you. Do you have that?
I do.
Could you advise us what role John Utley had in relation to the consultations on this proposal?
I can't recall, to be honest.
Well,
He
what
has
post does he hold?
an overview function in this, but his exact role, I'm afraid I don't recall.
On the email, he's described as Planning and Renewable Unit, Principal Advisor, at the foot of the email of 21st December.
Thank you. In that case, it would be his planning role that was relevant here. He was an overview of casework that is planning related.
And he says in the second email, sorry, in the second paragraph of that email, where he's responding to David Mackay, is it?
There's a Dave Mackay and a
David
David Patterson.
It's signed Dave, so I'm not entirely sure which.
I would think that Dave would be Dave Mackay, who is the operations manager.
Right. Anyway, he's responding to him on obviously emails where you'd raised a few points Is that correct? Is that how you read this email of Dave? It's got 14 numbered points.
Yes.
Under point number 3, obviously we don't have your email, but it's not especially, it's his view that it's not especially helpful, whatever that is, except to reinforce the argument that dune systems are more than the sum of their parts. They're systems, not a collection of unrelated habitats, which is one of your arguments related to fragmentation.
These arguments extend beyond fragmentation to address system function overall.
Yes. I said it's one of your arguments. And then we find number 13, he says the quotes, very strong case quotes that we made at the many links PLI didn't work. We should look for stronger arguments and presentation. Does that not reflect what I was just putting to you in relation to this inquiry, that to succeed at this inquiry there's a recognition you have to have stronger arguments?
That may have been John Nutley's view. It is not my view. It is my view that the arguments we offered at the many inquiry were all accepted by the reporters, and it was that analysis was then followed by the words however. In the light of the financial report, we are inclined to recommend approval of this to Minister. The failure, if that's how you wish to judge it in respect of many, was not due to the failure of our arguments. The arguments succeeded.
In relation to that particular point, but I think as you very well know, what I'm putting to you here is that last sentence, we should look for stronger arguments in presentation, discloses a mindset within SNH that if you are having to defend something at inquiry, then you've got to look for strong cases, strong arguments.
I would hope that if Scottish Natural Heritage took a matter to a public inquiry, we would look for strong arguments.
Or to look at it from another perspective, if the SNH objection justifiably triggered the public inquiry, then it should be able to stand in its own right without putting forward make-weight arguments.
In that case, I say if we recommend, if we make an objection to a local authority in respect of a planning application, we are bound, I think, by our function to have a fairly robust case. Well, I in fact delete the word fairly, a robust case.
A robust case that should be evidence-based.
It is evidence-based.
Although you said in your answer to one of my questions that you didn't envisage that it would get to a point in the near future that the site might be declassified should the invasive species not be brought under control, would it result in a change of the conservation status from unfavourable no change to unfavourable declining?
Yes.
Could you have the bundle of productions, which I have in a folder, but no doubt have as individual documents, SNH 1 to 10?
We have them as individual documents, so if you're picking out ones in the middle of that, it would be helpful to know which document, maybe rather than which long page number of a long document. Yeah.
Now, I don't think you'd have any difficulty in agreeing with me on this matter, Professor Angus, that what we can clearly see from the pre-application correspondence is that by virtue of the nature of the citation, there are a number of different features for which this site has been designated.
Correct.
And am I correct to understand that in SNH2, which is the letter of 1st August 2016, in scoping to the Highland Council, that what SNH has done in the first section entitled Summary is identify those features in respect of which it's anticipated that likely significant effects might occur?
I had nothing to do with this stage of the proceedings. This is a letter from, I would imagine, by Gillespie colleagues. Yes, David Patterson.
From one of the operations officer.
Correct.
David Patterson. Okay, well, let's approach this from a different perspective. If you could look at the citation, SNH 21, keep the bundle of 1 to 10 with you. We can see in the citation that there's a list of biological notified natural features. And they exceed those that are listed in paragraph 1.
They do.
And the fact of the matter is that this proposed development would have no impact, no likely significant effect, on eelgrass, sandflats, salt marsh, sand dunes, native pine wood.
You've mentioned sand dunes in that list.
Sorry, I didn't mean to mention sand dunes. There's one significant effect that I think SNH and the applicants are in agreement over in sand dunes.
Well, we're not doing this in majority count. The impact on sand dunes alone is sufficient to warrant our concern over this proposal.
Well, I know that's SNH's position. And we also know when one compares the feature breeding birds assemblage with the site management report that although breeding birds assemblage is in favourable condition at the present time, it's declining.
If you say so, I do not cover birds.
So does it come to this, that although you're giving evidence on behalf of SNH to support its position on the integrity assessment, you have only looked at one feature?
My function here is to give evidence on the impact on the sand dune feature and its function within the SSSI.
I'm not clear from that whether or not you're also saying that you have not considered you've not considered the assessment that the wetlands habitat within the sand dune system is not considered to be impacted upon such that it would not support the breeding bird assemblage?
I have not considered this because it is not my function within SNH to consider this matter.
And does that also then mean that when you have reached a view in relation to the biodiversity net gain report, that you've not had any regard to the other advantages for the site in relation to these other interests?
Could you specify which other interests you have in mind?
Well, for instance, the bird life, the protected bird species.
I give advice to my colleagues based on the sand dune feature and, if appropriate, other coastal habitat features. Anything they do with their advice is up to them. They will have sought other advice from ornithologists, and I know that they have. And the analysis of the relative merits is carried out by others in the organisation.
Could you have alongside the documents we're looking at CD 150, which is the biodiversity net gain at Coul links? Is this a document that you've studied? So you'll be aware as to the nature of the interests that are discussed in the document. And they include much wider interests and indeed the natural features that are covered within the SSSI citation. So when you make comments in your evidence as to why it is that you set aside the biodiversity net gain, you haven't taken account at all of the wider benefits to other features.
That is probably true, but my function, as I've said, is to address the coastal habitat in the context of this development?
I think we could slightly modify that answer to that is true. Could we not?
If you wish.
Thank you. The discussion in section 4 in relation to Dune Heath expansion at Coul Links, which is relevant.
Sorry, whose discussion?
In the document, the Biodiversity Net Gains report. Have you given consideration to the issues raised in this section relative to the question of whether there's net loss?
Yes and no.
That sounds like another equivocal answer. Perhaps you could explain it.
The issue of net loss, if you're using a statistics-based approach, is dependent on the time of your sampling in a dynamic system. We're trying to move in the direction of the overall functionality of this system to ensure that the habitats are all adequately representative in a functional context throughout the existence of this site. And I am reluctant to be drawn into any argument about what it was when and subtractions and divisions or what have you. You can do that. I would rather not go there.
Although you would rather not go there, you recognise that it's a valid approach.
I recognise that it is an approach that is widely used.
Well, can we be more specific? Although you recognise it's widely used, presumably amongst practitioners, it's not one that you agree with.
It is widely used by practitioners, and I'm not fighting it. I just personally would prefer to give the emphasis to system function.
Going back to the letters of objection, given the answers that you've given to me so far this afternoon, is it correct to say that you're only in a position to answer questions relative to sand dune habitat?
I'm really only in a position to answer questions to the scientific advice on sand dune habitat.
And having looked at these letters, which I presume you've done in preparation for giving evidence, are you satisfied that what is reflected in these letters properly reflects your advice?
These letters were based on a wide range of advice, not just from me, and a wide-ranging analysis by a considerable number of people. They are corporate letters, and as such, I endorse them.
Again, I'm not sure that's an answer to the question that I've put. In relation to your area of specialism, are you telling the inquiry that there was a wide range of contributions from other people in relation to your area of specialism, in addition to yourself?
No, I'm saying that there was a wide range of advice overall, and that some of my advice made it to the letter, some of it didn't. And I would imagine the same is true of the other specialised input, because you can only say so much in a letter of objection.
With this matter, where do we find within the letters of objection that start from tab 5 or document number 5, SNH 5, on the 24th of November 2017, any reference to fragmentation? Yes.
SNH 3, paragraph 3. Sorry, SNH 3, paragraph, page 1, paragraph 1.
But SNH 3 is a scoping response, isn't it? It's not an SNH consultation response. My question was where, from SNH 5, which is the start of the letters of objection of 24th November 2017, where in those letters of objection, the four that you refer to in your evidence, do we find any reference to fragmentation as a ground of objection?
So, as an order to save a bit of inquiry time, if it's SNH 05, section 3, headed appraisal of impacts and advice under the heading of sand dune, triple SI and Ramsar, in the third paragraph there's mention of fragmentation made there.
On page 2. Significant levels of habitat fragmentation with the coarse infrastructure spread throughout the dunes. Is that the sentence that you're referring to? I would... Excuse me. Sorry. The following sentence where you say, in our view, translocation of habitat is unlikely to be successful and therefore is not an appropriate management technique. Is that referring back to the issue of fragmentation, or is that a general statement in relation to whether or not it's habitat translocation is relevant?
It refers to habitat translocation itself.
So it's recognising that that could be a mitigation measure, but you don't think it's appropriate. It could be a mitigation measure for fragmentation, but you don't think it's appropriate.
We don't think it will work.
Well, what you say, it's not an appropriate management technique.
Well, if we don't think it's going to work, we would not regard it as an appropriate management technique on a protected site, and that is also the view of the Joint Nature Conservation Committee.
Based on its policy guidance in 2003.
Indeed.
And you told us earlier this morning that once you knew that this application was going to inquiry, at that point an internal decision was taken to engage Mr. Rooney to give you advice on translocation. So when this letter was written, whose advice was that based on? Was that view based on in relation to translocation?
At this stage, it would have been based on my advice, which in turn was based on advice given by Mr. Rooney at the Many Links inquiry. I actually accessed his evidence in order to provide mine in this case.
And then we have a series of additional letters dealing with other aspects of the case, additional matters, including dune slack habitat and boardwalks. Then we get to the final letter of 25th May 2018. And then in this letter,
Sorry, what reference is
oh,
that?
sorry, that's SNH 8. We see in the first paragraph, I appreciate you didn't write this. This response should be read alongside the previous advice that we submitted in relation to the two planning applications. That was the planning permission for borehole construction and the water storage reservoir together with the golf course. Is that right?
I haven't yet found your reference in this document.
SNH 8, the first paragraph in the letter.
So I'm not sure what I'm being asked here. It does say it should be read alongside the previous advice. So the previous advice is taken as read at this date.
And it's, I think, on page 5 that we see for the first time reference to Baltic Rush.
If you say so.
This is on page 5.
I'm not disputing that this might be the first reference to Baltic Rush.
And there's also reference to wetland invertebrates as another Ramsar interest. You mentioned on a number of occasions Ramsar interests in your inquiry report and your precognition, but you're never specific about impacts, assessed impacts on either of these receptors. Would that be fair?
My evidence is based on the impact upon the habitat and the processes affecting that habitat, and I do specifically mention that if we safeguard these processes, then the habitats and the species within them will be safeguarded by default.
So I think you say that in paragraph 2 of your precognition.
Yes.
With the simple hypothesis that if you maintain the habitats, then everything will be conserved, including rare species, which I presume is the Baltic Rush that you're referring to.
Including the Baltic Rush, but it actually includes all species, including those we may not even have found yet.
And do you know which wetland invertebrate species are relevant to your comments?
No, we have a separate invertebrate advisor who gives this advice.
But what you don't say in that paragraph, and you imply it, that habitats will be maintained, should it not be if habitats are maintained, given the difficulties that the site has?
I think I made it clear that I don't think things have deteriorated to that extent quite yet, or are imminent.
Well, you made it clear that you don't think things have deteriorated to the extent that the SSSI would be declassified. You do accept that it's deteriorating to the extent that its conservation status is unfavourable, declining. So it's an ongoing situation.
Just for a matter of clarity, I'm not sure that that's what I took from the answer on that issue earlier. I think the hypothesis was being put to Professor Angus earlier, that over time the invasive species taking over the site could lead to that result, not necessarily that was the position at this moment in time. I mean, I may be wrong in having gained that understanding, but
that's not my understanding of the evidence. No doubt we'll make submissions on the evidence in due course, but my recollection of the answer was that the question I put to Professor Angus specifically was that at this time the conservation status would be unfavourable and declining, to which I understood him to agree.
We seem all to have heard slightly different things. I thought what you were saying is that if you were making that assessment now, it would be unfavourable declining, but I had made a note to ask you to clarify, so why don't we just do that now?
Happy to clarify. The verdict unfavourable declining would be with regard to any future monitoring report which showed an additional decline.
From that shown in the previous monitoring report?
From that shown in 2014.
This paragraph, paragraph 2, is that you set up this scenario that the safest thing in conservation terms for the species on the site is to maintain their habitats. And what I'm putting to you is that underpinning that is the assumption that but for the golf course they would be maintained. And I'm saying as a clear proposition that is incorrect, because that is not the only threat for this site in conservation terms as you would see it.
You may have taken that implication from what I said, but I don't think I said these actual words or expressed that actual sentiment. But once again, these things are relative. There is no problem here in condition terms that is so serious that the cure is a golf course. The cure is the landowner signing a management agreement.
The cure is not, the golf course is not put forward as a cure. The golf course is a standalone proposition that carries with it significant benefits, because for the first time in years there'd be proper management. That's a different way to describe it than to pejoratively describe it.
My point is that it does not need a golf course for the problems of condition to be addressed. They stand alone.
So before we turn to the integrity assessment, could you look please at the SNH development management guidance that you refer to in your evidence?
Could you give me a production number?
Yes, CD 5.7. Did you carry out the assessment on integrity that were produced before the inquiry?
No.
Who did?
I would assume the area office, the local staff.
Senior, what, sorry?
I would assume the local staff
In Dingwall?
in Golspie.
In Golspie, sorry, yes. It's SEPA that's at Dingwall. And do you know who it was who did it?
No, but there's a fairly narrow range of names available.
On that basis, obviously whoever did do the site integrity assessment didn't discuss it with you.
That's incorrect. They did discuss it with me, and I commented on the draft.
You just said a moment ago you didn't know who did it.
I can't remember who did it. It would have been either David Patterson or Dave Mackay.
I'm now confused by your evidence because you say on the one hand you can't remember, but that you did discuss it with somebody. So you can't even remember who you discussed it with.
Absolutely correct. There have been many hundreds of consultations during this case, and I can't claim to remember every detail of every one.
Sir, I just noticed it's 3:15 now. The witness has been giving evidence since 1:55. I wonder if there is to be an afternoon break now might be an appropriate time to do so.
We are planning on having an afternoon break. Is this suitable for you, Ms. Wilson, or is okay? So we should 10 minutes and then we can come back at 3:25. Thank you. Afternoon session, please. Thank you.
Professor Rank, oh sorry. Do you still have CD 5.7 in front of you, the S&H development management and the natural heritage? Are you familiar with this?
I don't claim familiarity, only awareness.
So on that basis, would it be correct to say it's not something that you would use yourself?
I leave this to other people.
Sorry?
I leave this to other people.
Would those be the policy advisors?
Sorry?
Would those be policy advisors?
In this case, they would largely be area staff who may in turn have taken additional advice.
But you don't know whether they did or didn't?
No.
Are you aware that despite the fact you mention Ramsar sites in your evidence, that within this guidance it's stated that SNH very seldom, if ever, base advice on Ramsar designations?
I specified that we would cover Ramsar in these proceedings via the SSSI concerns, which, if followed, would accommodate the Ramsar concerns. There was no need to separate the two.
Well, that's not entirely correct, is it? Because the Ramsar features that you cite, the Baltic rush and the wetland invertebrates, are not listed as natural features in the SSSI citation, are they?
I mentioned species only as examples. My line was very clear that I intended to concentrate on habitats and their functions, and species would be protected by default. I did not address species in their own right.
just for your notes, given the answer that Professor Angus has just given, page 13 of 87 of this document, there's a footnote 5 that makes that point. And then a very clear statement is given on page 30 of 87. Could you look, please, at page 44 of 87 of the guidance? This is guidance specific to sites of special scientific interest. And I'm not going to ask you about policy questions, but we find that there's a direct quote from paragraph 212 of SPP as to the circumstances in which development that affects a SSSI should be permitted, should only be permitted. And one that's relevant to your evidence is the objectives of designation and the overall integrity of the area will not be compromised. And that's the phrase that appears in your evidence, isn't it?
My evidence would cover that, and then there is additional material within the context of that bullet point.
What do you mean by additional material?
The objectives of designation were written, as in the site management objectives, were written in 2011. And our thinking and our policy has moved on since then. And my evidence includes aspects that were not included in the 2011 objectives.
And what are those?
Primarily fragmentation and habitat function.
You're referring to the site management objectives?
Yes.
Could you look, please, at paragraph 20 of your precognition? And we see the statement there right at the end that you support the position taken in the SNH consultation response and written submissions that the objectives of designation and overall integrity of the SSSI would be compromised, lifted from that wording in the guidance. And we see the same thing in the final paragraph of your inquiry report as well.
Yes.
I want to be clear as to what your evidence is on the question of objectives of designation. And you referred to the management objectives. If we could just have those available. And they're SNH 24. Describes the site, and towards the back of the document, at page 6, we find the management objectives. Is that right?
Yes.
And the one that's relevant to sand dune habitat is the second.
So it would appear.
Well, I want to know if that's your opinion, that of those objectives, that is the one that's relevant. If you want to take time to look at them, do so.
I feel that objective 1 should have included dune, because maintaining extent and distribution is a fundamental aspect of all site-based conservation.
You feel as though this first management objective should have included sand dune habitat,
I do.
but it doesn't.
It doesn't, but I think it should. And in most circumstances, I would expect site management objectives to make that objective in respect of all notified habitats.
But what we do have is to restore the condition of sand dune habitat. Is that not perhaps the explanation as to why one doesn't apply to sand dune habitat, because it's the only one that's not in a favourable condition? It's got to be restored first before it's in a condition to be maintained in the condition, distribution and extent that it should be.
You could take that view, but I would suggest that the remaining sand dune, which is not in unfavourable condition, still needs to be maintained in terms of its function and extent.
But taking your logic, if you maintain the extent of sand dune habitat that is sufficiently compromised that it's in an unfavourable condition, then all you're doing is maintaining unfavourable habitat, unfavourable condition, because you're not trying to reverse it.
Well, objective 2 covers that one, I think.
The logic of the first management objective must be to maintain it as it is, maintain the condition. So you're advocating maintaining sand dune habitat in an unfavourable condition.
That would never be the intention. We feel there is sufficient sand dune habitat here in favourable condition, and that condition should be maintained or improved. And that would normally be an objective of any SSSI, irrespective of wording of a site management statement.
I can't help but feel you're making up SNH's position on the hoof, because if you look at the first page of this document, where the features are recorded and the condition of the feature is recorded, we find sand dunes, as at October 2003, unfavourable recovering. That is not saying that SNH considers that there's sufficient sand dune habitat to be maintained. That's saying there's not sufficient sand dune habitat and that it has to be reversed.
That is exactly what SNH has been trying to achieve via a management agreement with the landowner.
But you doggedly refuse to acknowledge that there is an opportunity that could be taken to achieve that management objective through the proposed mitigation measures put forward that will have as one of its objective restoration of the condition of sand dune habitat.
I believe that to be a side issue of the development, and that the real issue of condition is one that can be addressed in isolation. And that would be a point we maintain quite strongly.
Well, you say we maintain, we've only got your evidence to the inquiry on this matter.
We do, but though I sit here in exactly the terms I described in my opening paragraph, I do so on the basis of extensive discussions with my colleagues.
How can the restoration of the condition to a favourable restoration of the sand dune habitat to a favourable conservation status not be relevant to the issues before this inquiry when you say achievement of these management objectives are relevant to site integrity?
I didn't say it was not a matter for this inquiry. It is a matter for this inquiry because you have brought it up as an integral part of the development. Our case is that we do not need this to be an integral part of the development. It stands alone and could be addressed in isolation.
Well, that's a matter that submissions will be made upon in due course. But am I correct in understanding that your evidence to the inquiry is that you look at the question of site integrity by referencing these management objectives?
Among other things, yes.
Among other things being
a decision by Scottish Natural Heritage in 2017 to adopt the ecosystem approach.
What decision by SNH to adopt an ecosystem approach?
I'm not sure how I can describe it beyond that. The senior leadership team of Scottish Natural Heritage made a decision in August 2017 to adopt the ecosystem approach, which is heavily dependent on ecosystem function.
You're referring to a general policy of general application?
I'm not quite sure of its context, but it was absolutely clear, and I copied it to my colleagues in Golspie.
Is it before the inquiry?
It is not.
A separate issue, and it may be that this is reflective of your limited experience in decision-making processes, but a separate issue with your suggestion that this first management objective should apply because you think it should apply. Does that not cut across the whole purpose of management statements, which are to let those affected by SSSI citations and those who may be contemplating development affecting a SSSI to understand what tests they have to meet in order to address the question of integrity?
Well, my role in this is very clearly to give the best and most up-to-date scientific advice that I can. The document in front of us here is not legally binding. I am not restricted by it or constrained by it in any way, and I am free to expand on or alter this advice.
Does your belief, Professor Ankus, that in giving your evidence you can just change what's within the site management statement? You can change the objectives.
In giving my scientific opinion about the adverse influences on the ecosystems of this site, I give my personal opinion, yes.
We see that in the paragraph below it's SNH's position in this guidance that's supposed to inform those involved in development that there are 6 criteria to be considered when addressing the policy test above. Do you see that?
No, I haven't got the reference in the document.
The page that we were at before, page 44.
Which document, sorry?
It's the guidance, SNH's own guidance.
Okay, I've got 44.
Below the sentence that you cite in your evidence, that there are 6 different criteria that should be taken into account when asking the question as to whether the objectives of designation and the overall integrity will be compromised.
I would contend that what I have just said about system function relates to integrity.
Well, I didn't ask you what you would contend. I asked you, can we see that that's what we should take from this document, that these 6 criteria are used by SNH for the purposes of addressing that policy test? I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking you how we take what's in this document.
This is not a document that governs my work. I give scientific advice.
So on that basis, you haven't given specific consideration to these criteria?
SNH has.
And my question was, you haven't given?
It is not part of my function to do this.
And in particular, you haven't given any thought to how the balancing duty might be fulfilled in reaching conclusions on integrity?
On the contrary, the suggestion of a compromise solution to this development involving part of an SSSI came from me. This is not part of my function as a rule. It is a function of the way I do my job, that I try and find a way through the legislation that allows a development to proceed while also protecting the notified feature. And it is to the credit of the local staff that they adopted this advice without ever saying, this isn't your job, because literally it wasn't my job. I think that the balancing duty exists in a document, and it exists as a process that my colleagues in Golspie go through, but the spirit of the balancing duty runs through all of us.
Well, what do you understand the balancing duty to be? What are you balancing?
I'm balancing the benefits of any development against its impact. And balance does not always suggest that the balance is equal. And the balancing duty, as I recall, makes it absolutely clear that it is not supposed to affect the core interest of a designated feature.
How would you define the benefits of this development?
I simply accept that there would be benefits. I do not claim to have any expertise in economics. I just know, having lived most of my life in peripheral areas, that developments are generally of benefit to the local community. That being the case, we and I think I'm justified in using the term we, adopted a course of action that would result in some adverse impact to the site by allowing golf in part of the SSS, within the SSSI boundary, that would, as I say, enable the development to go ahead without unduly compromising the notified features.
Sir, can I just say, I don't want to interrupt Ms. Wilson and Julie, but we have spent a lot of time today examining pretty much exhaustively Professor Angus' role, his responsibilities, how it sits with colleagues within SNH, how they went about preparing their statutory consultation advice, and so on. I do wonder we're at the point where we're at diminishing returns, and whether there are other aspects that might be more directly relevant to Professor Angus's inquiry report, which deals with a number of scientific issues.
Well, sir, I don't accept that. First of all, I don't accept, when I'm in the middle of cross-examination, it's for my learned friend to decide whether we're at the point of diminishing returns. And secondly, my learned friend on behalf of SNH is ignoring the fact that in the written statement on legislation and policy, it is clearly stated that the integrity assessment was carried out in accordance with these criteria. Now, I appreciate that Professor Angus can only provide a limited amount of assistance on that issue, given what he's told us about who carried it out and that it wasn't him. But when I asked him if he had given any consideration to these criteria, he was adamant that he had given consideration to the balancing duty, and I'm, I think, entitled to explore how he did that, because it obviously influenced the advice that he gave to the officers who then did carry out the integrity assessment.
Sir, those matters have been canvassed with the witness, and he's given very straight responses, and we're now in the situation where we're going back to issues that were discussed earlier today about how he applied the balancing duty. And in my respectful submission, we're spending excessive amount of time on this issue when there are other scientific issues which Professor Angus has spent a considerable period of time in preparing his evidence that are being, that as yet haven't been looked at.
Yes, there are many other matters of scientific interest that we'll be keen to hear about. Yeah, I mean, I think limited is a fair, it's the word you used, and I think it's a fair one. I'd understood Professor Angus to be saying that he didn't overtly apply the balancing duty, but that's not his role within SNH, but he sought to see if a way could be found. I mean, beyond that, if you feel there are a couple more questions that will help, then fine, but I'm less and less from this as we go on, to be honest.
Well, so that's probably because we're nearly at the end of the line of cross-examination, and we would have probably completed it by now. But there are two questions in particular that I want to put to the witness as a consequence of the last answer. And one relates to the reference to what you understood the benefits to be, which, if I correctly took on board your evidence, it was there are benefits to the local community. So, before we leave this, is that your understanding that the proposed development of Coul Links Golf Course would have local benefits?
Not only is it my understanding, it was the opening line of the letter of objection signed by our director, Nick Halfide. I believe quite strongly that the balancing duty has been accommodated by Scottish natural heritage, and that we are not required to understand the entirety of the economic benefits if we simply accept them. We are not disputing them. It is not part of our evidence that there is anything wrong with the economic case.
Is whether it's correct to summarise your evidence as being that when you use the phrase in your own precognition and inquiry report that you're satisfied that the objectives of designation and overall integrity of the SSSI would be compromised. That's based on a consideration of the management objectives. And other things. I've heard you and other things.
So I would make the point it includes additional context, including the decision by senior management in SNH to adopt an ecosystem approach.
And is that the only additional consideration?
It's a fairly substantial one, given that it involves fragmentation and ecosystem function.
So is the answer yes, that is the only one?
No, it probably also affects the impacts on on dune slacks.
For this site?
For this site.
But that, of course, would be encompassed within the second management objective.
Yes.
So looking then at the question of fragmentation, I know that you separately refer to the direct loss, but there seems to be more emphasis in your evidence now on the indirect impacts than on the direct impacts. It's the case, is it not, that the only assessment that has been carried out of the nature of the fragmentation that might occur is that carried out by Dr. McMillan?
Now you find in the appendix to my topic paper there is also an analysis.
I think the one or two sheets, is that right?
Yes.
I would suggest that Dr. McMullen's assessment is more systematic and rigorous.
Dr. McMullen's advice is very good as far as it goes. My contention is that it does not go far enough in that it ignores the very important, indeed critical, edge effect.
And the evidence that you have for this edge effect is very limited, is it not, from scientific publications?
Well, there's a difference between limited and I haven't got the phrase to hand, but I recall Dr. Cosgrove saying there is no evidence, which is clearly not the case.
Well, your evidence is what we're looking at, and you've asserted on more than one occasion during the course of today that your work is evidence-based and SNH's work is evidence-based. So given that you say this is such an important effect and that it's been ignored and underlooked, then applicants would be entitled to see in your evidence a sound evidential base for the conclusions that you draw.
I have cited not only the production numbers but actual text from these papers that I consider constitutes an evidence base that is worthy of consideration by this inquiry.
I don't intend to take you to each and every one of them. It's too warm and late in the afternoon to venture into Australian habitats and other such places. But just by going through the list of SNH's documents, we can tell, can we not, that there are a significant number of your reference papers that are not clearly of direct relevance to this case and this circumstances at Coul Links.
Ecological principles apply across habitats, and they have been, the evidence with regard to edge effect has been conducted principally on forest and heathland. I tried to eliminate the forest evidence from my evidence, and there is quite a lot of that material that is based on heathland, and I noticed that Dr. McMullen's paper, I think I'm right in saying it was Dr. McMullen's paper, included a reference to Uruguayan spiders. Now, it is entirely feasible that what applies to a spider in Uruguay applies at Coul Links. It is common practice for ecologists to use work that involves ecological principles that originate in other areas, hence the importance of international scientific journals.
But I would characterize your evidence as having this general, broad nature to it, which is that you haven't sought to identify likely significant effects as your starting point, have you?
I think the edge effect is a likely significant effect.
Now, in respect of particular species, you haven't tried to identify that.
In respect of heathland habitat,
what you do in your evidence is you talk about adverse impacts, assumed adverse impacts, and then conclude that because, in your view, there's a lack of certainty, the precautionary principle should apply.
I don't think a precautionary principle applies because I think it applies.
Well, I'm suggesting that that's your reasoning.
I think I'm entitled to call on the precautionary principle, and there is actual evidence of the existence of the edge effect.
There may be evidence of the existence of the edge effect, but what there is not in your inquiry report or precognition is any scientific analysis of what likely significant effects might result from that if you were correct.
I retain the position that the productions I have offered cover that.
Well, the productions don't contain an assessment of likely significant effects for Coul links.
I think I just explained that it is common for ecologists to take principles from one scientific area and apply them to the other, assuming there are reasonable grounds for doing so, and I believe there are in this case.
When you say reasonable grounds for doing so, that there's some relationship between the findings in the research paper that you rely upon and Coul links?
In terms of heathland, yes.
Your reference that you cite in paragraph 29 of your, I think it's in your precognition that I have a reference, but we find it in the inquiry report as well. Just before I look at that particular paragraph, going back to an answer that you gave to me where you criticised Dr. Cosgrove and suggested that in his inquiry report he says there's no evidence and that you disagree with that. What he actually says is that there's no evidence of likely significant effects of fragmentation. He doesn't say there's no impacts, but that there's no evidence of likely significant effects. But that's a distinction that is important, is it not?
I would agree there is a distinction. I maintain my stance in terms of likely significant impact.
Well, you don't have a stance in relation to likely significant impacts because you don't, as you agreed with me earlier today, you don't discuss likely significant effects. You discuss adverse impacts in your evidence.
I think we're now getting into semantics. Let us agree then it is adverse impact.
Could you look at paragraph 15 of your precognition, please? Do you have that?
So I missed the reference.
Paragraph 15 of your precognition.
Yep.
And you refer here to Dr. McMullen's evidence in relation to 2.5 metre wide paths, and you refer to the paths being stated as being 5 metres wide in the design statement. To begin with, the first point is that the design and access statement makes clear that they are a nominal 5 metres depending on design. Do you accept that?
I accept that, but there is a substantial difference between 5 metres and 2.5.
Well, the way that you write this is that you're asserting that they're all 5 metres wide.
That isn't what I said. And in any case, it is our case that it is not the width of the barrier that is important so much as its edge. We are not saying that the width is unimportant, but the really functional aspect of the edge effect is the edge itself, rather than the width of what lies beyond it.
Well, I know you make that point. In my view, this overlooks what is known as the edge effect. Just because an organism is capable of crossing a barrier does not mean it will. It may be inhibited by lack of cover or a change in microclimate, and there are numerous examples of this in literature. And then you cite NA-HLD-086. Could you have that in front of you, please?
NA-HLD-086 is my own topic paper, in which I list the references.
In this particular study, 61, the subject matter of the paper is fragmentation through roads, is it not? Used in relation to agricultural fields. If you look at 89, page 89, you can see the different roads that are being looked at.
The road is the fragmenting agency. It is the road that causes the edge effect.
Well, it may do, but the point that you're making is that small barriers have been confirmed as preventing significant crossings by animals ranging from mice to beetles. And you cite page 81 for that.
Page 81 is the first page, and it actually refers to paragraph 3 of the abstract.
But I think it's obvious, is it not, that if you have a linear construction such, and we see this on page 82, such as roads, canals, power lines and railways, supporting agricultural land use, intensive chemical-supported agricultural land use, that's not applicable to boardwalks and grassed path through a golf course.
I think the edge effect has been established within the scientific literature, and it is the duty of a scientist to take situations from one scenario and apply them more widely. If we couldn't do that, this scientific literature would be many times its already vast size.
But you don't even describe it accurately here, because you talk about small barriers on the ground, canals, roads, etc. is referred to on page 82, and not small barriers on the ground.
I can't lay my hands on this at the moment, but I do recall a reference, and it may have been this one, where the author said that even small tracks tended to have this effect on the movement of mammals. The essence of this argument is that, once again, just because an organism is capable of crossing a barrier does not mean that it will. In fact, the original work on this, the one that established the effect, was done by, and it is actually an SNH production, SNH 42, by Jared Diamond on tropical birds, which are perfectly capable of crossing narrow sea barriers, but they don't.
You also say in this same paragraph, in the last sentence, quoting again from the literature, that it's not just the absolute distance between patches that is important, but the nature of the barrier between them. So that's a recognition by you that it's the nature of the barrier that's relevant, that is also relevant.
It is also relevant, as well as the edge of the barrier.
And you cite SNH 110 for that. Could you have that one as well in front of you?
I have that in front of me.
Sorry?
I have that in front of me, and the relevant...
It's page 66 that you refer to.
I think it's 66. Sorry, the lighting here isn't as good as it could be.
No, I know, it seems to have dimmed.
It's either 66 or 68 I have here. It's got a shading diagram in the top left and a photograph in the bottom left. It is 66.
What's the title of the document you have? Because I don't have. seem to have the right one at 110. The document I have at 110 is the ecology of golf courses.
It's the ecology of golf courses.
It is the ecology of golf courses. Is it not also the case that in this document too there's a recognition of the fact that the relevant separation distance is 100 metres?
Very possibly, but this will vary between organisms. And I reiterate, in this document, on page 66, the top right, it says, however, it is not just the absolute distance between patches that is important, but the nature of the barrier between them. And it gives an example involving 100 metres wide.
If you turn over the page to page 66, and again on the right-hand side, in an initial...
Sorry, we were on 66. Do you mean 67?
Right. Well, on the right-hand side, in an initial study of heathland invertebrates on golf courses, it was found that the invertebrate density in patches declined with increasing degree of isolation of a patch. In that study, it appeared that the critical interpatch distance may be, may be about 100 metres.
For that study?
Well, that's silly. Is that your evidence?
It's some of my evidence.
Well, this is the paper that you've cited to support your evidence, and the bits you don't like, you just describe as silly.
No, there is also the paper we looked at previously by Mader.
The part you rely upon is a couple of lines down, but in this, just directly above it, you can see that there are different views being expressed. It's not black and white as you would portray in your evidence.
It is seldom black and white in ecology, and occasionally one must develop a view. Can I refer you to SH112?
Can I just clarify, sorry, just a clarification. About 3 or 4 answers ago, Ms. Wilson heard, well, that's silly, whereas what I heard is just for that study. So can you...
just for that study. May I expand on my evidence, given that this quantity as well as this quality has been questioned? SNH112. In the opening, in the abstract, in the middle of the abstract, when the neighbouring areas reach a sufficiently high density, the neighbouring groups socially fence the central population by inhibiting further emigration. Once emigration is blocked, population regulation is achieved through resource exhaustion. The social fence hypothesis proposes that the effectiveness of spacing behaviour to regulate population densities decreases as the social impermeability of neighbouring groups increases. In other words, it describes the adverse impact of isolation and thus fragmentation.
But this is a hypothesis that this paper is exploring.
It's a hypothesis based on evidence, and I'm afraid science does involve the use of hypotheses from time to time. That they are evidence-based.
Well, I understand what the purpose of a hypothesis is for the purposes of scientific research, but in your evidence, you're absolutely certain and have no doubt in your mind whatsoever as to the nature of the fragmentation effect. But the papers that you cite in support of that are not as clear and as conclusive as you would suggest.
The edge effect or fence effect is one component of my argument about the impact of fragmentation. There are related issues of connectivity that I would be happy to expand on further.
Somewhat remarkable, is it not, that something that you today in evidence are contending is such an important issue and perhaps of greater significance than the direct loss of sand dune habitat, that it's only raised at this stage of the decision-making process, in the detail that you've raised it, and also to the extent to which you seek to argue it's a very significant effect and threat.
I don't see the timing of this as relevant. It's the effectiveness and accuracy of the scientific advice to the case that is the relevant factor, surely.
But if the science is so clear, then it is an issue that one would have expected that you would have argued much more strongly from the outset, as opposed to saying, as you did in the initial stages of the objection, this provides further evidence in support of our objection, and your objection was based upon direct loss of habitat. It was an also-ran argument. It was put in to provide further support to the position that you are maintaining, that there would be adverse impacts such that it would affect the integrity of the site.
We were specifically asked to address the issue of fragmentation and to address the issue of habitat function in this inquiry by the reporters.
Could you look at SNH 52, please? Page 4 of 5 is what's coming up on the screen. It's right at the bottom of the 4th page, paragraph beginning with species in rank order.
It's the 5th page of my document.
Yes, we are. Sorry, the 5th page. Do you have that paragraph?
I do.
I'm interested in the text that begins. Since the areas of the individual heathlands were negatively correlated with the scores on axis L, it appeared that large heathlands were characterized by a lack of species rather than the presence of particular species. Most of the above species were common in small heathlands, but rare or absent on large, and may have been more common in other biotopes or at heathland edges. That would tend to suggest that it's more species-rich in a smaller habitat than unfragmented large habitat.
If you have a small area of habitat, the edge effect affects the edge of the fragment. And this, in turn, affects the species composition of the edge of that fragment, so that any improvement in biodiversity of, say, a heathland is not actually an improvement in the biodiversity of heathland spiders or other invertebrates. It is the addition of perhaps grassland species. Biodiversity per se is too narrow a measure for this.
So far as Coul Links is concerned, I think we know from other evidence before the inquiry that it's argued quite strenuously, and the applicants support this as well, that lichens or invertebrates need light and heat. So they would prefer edges. Is that not the case?
We acknowledge there are certain benefits for lichens, yes.
And for certain invertebrates as well.
I haven't examined the evidence for invertebrates, but it is entirely feasible. We argue that the overall impact is adverse.
Well, the passage from NA-HLD-086 that I've just cited indicates that.
I reiterate that the edge effect is taken together with fragmentation and corridor evidence to provide an overall picture of adverse impact.
Returning again to what actually occurs at Coul Links rather than in other places in the world, the evidence at Coul Links demonstrates, does it not, that there are small areas of heathland within the dune slacks and other areas, and they're species rich.
This is actually addressed in Dr. McMullen's topic paper. I need a moment to find his reference.
It's APP 3.1.
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty identifying my source, but somewhere in, I think, my precognition, I refer to Dr. McMullen highlighting the value of large habitats, large areas of habitat. He goes on to say that because there are already small areas of habitat at Coul Links, it won't matter if the larger ones are fragmented. I fail to follow this argument. Large fragments are invariably regarded as preferable to small ones.
Your own production, though, SNH52 would dispute that, because what was clear from the passage that we looked at, the study found that there were more species in the smaller fragments than there were in the larger areas.
I explained that this was due to the invasion of these small fragments by species from other habitats. We're trying to conserve, in terms of heathland species. And if you add grassland ones to that, obviously the species diversity increases, but not in a desirable way, because the objective is to conserve heathland.
Your suggestion that on the golf course, the fact that there is a path is in some way going to prevent movement of species, does that not almost carry with it the implication that species are not adaptable and don't change to the circumstances around them, which is not, again, what you would see at Coul links, where SNH and others argue that there's quite a bit of dynamism at Coul links. And things have to adapt.
Sorry, I missed the last.
Species have to adapt in that situation.
There is a limit to the ability of species to adapt meaningfully. And I think this site already faces challenges by way of invading vegetation. It will face additional challenges in terms of climate change, and retaining the entire adaptability and resilience of the habitat is highly desirable, and with that we will permit the adaptability of the species. And building a golf course significantly detracts from and compromises the adaptability of this ecosystem, and by implication the adaptability of the species therein.
Much of what you've said on this topic and the inability or your belief that species will find it hard to adapt, given the other challenges, it's all stated in the general. You don't identify particular species.
Again, I go back to the point that if we look after the functions, the habitats are retained, and if we look after the habitats, the species are retained, and we allow species to adapt by conserving the entirety of where they live.
Well, we know that that's your position, and I've already cross-examined you on different aspects of the assumptions that underlie that. But we are here looking at what are the likely effects from this proposed development, and hiding behind that general theory isn't an answer to the practical question before this inquiry: what are the likely significant effects of this development? And you don't answer that, I would suggest.
I suggest that I do, in that fragmentation is a known adverse impact. It is so well known that one of your own productions, I think it's 118, actually regards fragmentation of heathland as one of the greatest environmental threats.
Well, that's linked to the evidence of Mr. Haspel and Mr. Taylor, and they can address that in their evidence. But you have, just to finish the review of your papers, or some of your papers, you've today, in different aspects of the evidence, suggested that golf course habitats and improvements to habitats through golf course development isn't a good thing because it's not as good as maintaining the habitat in natural form. But if you look at two papers, the first one, SNH-38, the role of golf courses in biodiversity conservation and ecosystem management. The introduction says, golf courses are subject to much debate in environmental terms because their construction often involves modification of natural habitats, and then their management may involve excessive use of chemicals and irrigation. Although, as discussed in the evidence of Mr. Haspel and Mr. Taylor, that has changed significantly since this was written in 2008. Although chemical contamination of water bodies from golf course establishments still evoke concern, A large-scale review in the United States concluded that there are generally no significant human toxicological impacts from golf courses to groundwater and surface water. During the last decade, scholars have proposed that golf courses play a role in the support of biodiversity, with an increasing number of case studies having assessed their values in ecological terms. However, no synthesis of those studies has been compiled, making it difficult to more comprehensively understand what role golf courses hold in biodiversity, conservation and ecosystem management.
We have never said that there is no natural heritage value in golf courses. In fact, we have notified sites of special scientific interest containing golf courses. We maintain, however, that the natural habitat is always preferable to a golf course. And the one study I know of that recorded an improvement in biodiversity in real terms as opposed to selected terms used agricultural land as its starting point. So yes, there was a biodiversity improvement. Just as I will, I'm not going to concede, I will welcome this biodiversity improvement that has been demonstrated at Castle Stewart. There are many, many examples where golf courses benefit the environment, but I would challenge you to find one where a golf course actually improved a natural dune system in terms of its ecosystem function and its natural biodiversity.
Well, on this issue of protected sites, at page 195 in this same paper, the second paragraph under the heading Discussion. Although we could not statistically determine how golf courses ranked relative to individual categories of land use due to limitation of data, a high proportion of golf courses, 63%, were found to have ecological values similar to or higher than nature-protected sites. That paints a slightly different picture to the one that you've been painting today, which is that you can't treat a golf course as having the same ecological status as a SSSI.
And your own questioning has attempted to get me to focus again and again on Coul links rather than a wide-ranging study. Our analysis of this case is based on the situation at Coul links as we understand it. And it is our duty, and I use that word in its legal sense, it is our duty to conserve and give advice to that effect in respect of the designated natural features, and we regard it as almost impossible to imagine that a golf course on this site would result in an improvement to these natural features. Certain aspects of it, yes, but these certain aspects could be achieved, as I've said, without the golf course.
When you say we find it almost impossible, is that really a we this time, or is it you?
I think this time it is a we.
Reading on further down on that page, it's interpretation of the analysis of Pearson's adjusted residuals provided us with strong evidence that if we were to build a golf course in a natural habitat, we are not likely to experience higher overall ecological values as a result of this change to the landscape. On the other hand, if we build a golf course in an urban area, we will most likely be experiencing increasing ecological values. So that reinforces or supports the point that you make, that it depends upon perhaps in some instances where your starting point is, but the conclusion of the paper, page 204, is that overall our literature review shows that golf courses play an essential role in biodiversity conservation and ecosystem management. Many golf courses hold high levels of biodiversity, even surpassing land designated for nature conservation in many cases. That was the result of this study.
I don't know specifically the context for these remarks, but I can venture that there are certain habitats that are actually regarded as in better condition if their biodiversity is low. The one that springs to mind, which is unlikely to be the one they're thinking of, is blanket bog, where an increase in biodiversity would be regarded as a negative attribute.
Well, that's not comparing like with like. Blanket bog is not the same habitat as dunes, a dune system.
My understanding of this text is that it didn't refer to dune systems either.
No, but you're giving an example of where richness of biodiversity may be negative. We don't need to consider that because we're not in that situation.
But we have
And you wouldn't build a golf course in a peat bog.
Indeed. We have reference, nevertheless, to cases where biodiversity has increased over and above the natural habitat. That is rarely an objective of conservation. The natural habitat would almost invariably be preferred to a golf course. And I would be intrigued if you could identify an example where it would be beneficial to nature conservation to build a golf course in a notified site.
Coul Links is such an example because the condition of the site is such that there are significant benefits that can be delivered. Is that not the case?
I'm afraid I must go back yet again to my contention that the two are not directly connected. The condition can be rectified without a golf course.
Can I? It's 4:45. Clearly, Professor Angus will be here tomorrow giving evidence. So, are we coming to a natural break that allows us to perhaps wrap up for today?
I've finished that topic as it happens, so it is a natural break.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we said at the start that we would aim for a 10 o'clock start each day. So thank you everyone for your participation today. And if we can be back here ready to start at 10 a.m., then thank you very much.